Lamentation 3:21 to verse 23. Can we read together? Whichever screen you're looking at, wherever you are seated, let's read together. Therefore I have hope. What did he say? This I do, this I recall to mind. Therefore I have hope. Verse 22. Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassion. Verse 23. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. God's faithfulness is loaded in his mercies. It is because of the Lord's mercies that we travel and we return. And so if we are giving thanks to the Lord, thanks to him because of his mercies. I am glad that I am one of those who took on this journey. Wonderful it is for me. I just recall after I returned that in Nigeria, I've done it in Israel, in the US, in the UK, but in the last 10 years and more, I have not traveled by road anywhere in Nigeria more than 4 or 5 hours. Probably the highest I have gone by road is Kano, Kaduna, and Kogi State. Every other place beyond this distance, I will always take flight. And so in the past 10 years, this should be the farthest I have gone by road, and I can't believe that I drove this distance and I drove back. And going, I said to myself, the distance between until I got to the Kwara part of it was terribly bad, and I imagine that we have government in that state in the past 8 years. Terribly bad. In all my life, I've not driven in such a terrible road. But we went and we returned, and I acknowledge that this is the Lord's mercies. I had time and we're discussing with some of the pastors, ideas of my church in Abuja, with whom I've had great relationship, and I've had to preach in some Ekwa churches here in Abuja, and I have a lot of friends. And we lost some of our ministers who traveled from Abuja to attend a burial in Adamawa State. But while I was discussing with one of the pastors, and he asked me, do I know so person? And I say, oh, wonderful. He used to be the senior pastor of Ekwa Maitama. Guess what he said to me? He said he went on a burial like this and he didn't return. And I immediately answered him, I said, but we will return. But then, don't take it for granted. When you go through a path others went through and they never return, if you go through it, acknowledge that it is the Lord's mercies. You were not smarter, you were not wiser, you were not stronger, and that is why every time you return with joy, and add thanksgiving to it. Why? It is the Lord's mercies. If you want to continue to enjoy the mercies of God, you must always know how to return to give thanks to the Lord. What preserves life is the mercy of God. What keeps us is the mercy of God. Look at the testimony. The same bus stop where they stay all the time was the same bus stop some people stood yesterday and they never returned. Every time you stay at that bus stop, you must always acknowledge that God is the reason why it didn't happen while you were there. It could happen anytime. One day my son asked me, he said, why do people sleep and don't wake up? I said, those of us who woke up, it was the lost mercies. It could be anybody. Anybody could go to sleep and not wake up. It's the lost mercies. And how do we sustain that mercy and continue to enjoy the mercies of God? How to always return to give thanks to God if we want to continue to enjoy God's mercies. This morning, I'd like to show you a man in the Bible who took God's mercies for granted and see what happened to him. So that we can take this lesson to heart. So it can become part of us that we should not just go to God to make requests. We should always know how to return back to say, thank you, Lord, for granting the request that we ask, and not take it for granted. A man in the Bible, 1 Samuel chapter 9. King Saul, you know him. 1 Samuel chapter 9. Look at his credential when he became a king. For the sake of our time, I won't go through all his detail, but you can read that